Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into some Clausewitz.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, we're looking at On War, chapters 9 and 10 from book 3,
Okay.
covering surprise and stratagem.
All right.
Now, these are obviously concepts you're familiar with as a member of the military, but Clausewitz's take is a little more nuanced than just, catch him off guard.
Right.
So we've got our expert here to help us unpack his thinking.
Yeah.
See how it applies not just to 19th century battles, but to the modern landscape you're operating in as well.
And that's what's so fascinating about Clausewitz. He wasn't just writing a how-to manual for warfare. He was trying to understand the very nature of conflict. And his insights are surprisingly relevant even today.
Okay, so Chapter 9 jumps right into surprise.
Yeah.
Calls it the foundation of all military undertakings, connects it to achieving numerical superiority.
Right.
Basically saying that a well-executed surprise can win you the battle before it even begins.
Yeah.
Like getting the drop on your opponent.
Exactly. And think about it, even outside of a military context, how often does being surprised put you at a disadvantage?
Oh, sure.
It's instinctive. But what's fascinating is how Clausewitz distinguishes between the tactical and strategic levels of surprise.
Okay, so it's not just about one surprise attack, but about surprising your enemy on a much larger scale.
Precisely. He argues that while pulling off a surprise is more common in tactics,
Right.
like a surprise flanking maneuver or a sudden ambush, it's far more difficult on a strategic level. Imagine trying to launch a surprise invasion of a country in today's world
Right.
with satellites, radar, and instant global communication. It's almost impossible to achieve that element of complete surprise.
Yeah, you can't exactly hide a fleet of ships or a column of tanks anymore.
Exactly. And Clausewitz uses a great example to illustrate this point even further. The idea of a surprise attack on a fortified city. Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, when sieges were a much bigger deal, this was a common goal. But even then, pulling it off was incredibly difficult.
It makes you think about all those historical sieges that dragged on for months, even years. The element of surprise must have been long gone.
Absolutely. And you can see why. Gathering an army, setting up supply lines, transporting heavy siege weapons, these things take time. It's not like you can quietly sneak a whole army across a continent anymore.
Yeah, it seems like the bigger the operation, the harder it is to keep it under wraps. Even today, Clausewitz was really onto something there. But he also points out that even if you manage to pull off a surprise, it doesn't guarantee a win.
Right.
He uses examples from both Frederick the Great and Napoleon to illustrate this point.
Right. Now, these were masters of speed and maneuver. They literally wrote the book on using surprise in warfare. And yet, even their surprise attacks didn't always work out the way they'd hoped.
So what happened? Why weren't their surprise attacks always successful?
Well, this is where Clausewitz brings in the element of luck, which he acknowledges plays a role, even with the best planning.
So you're saying that even the most brilliant military minds can't control everything on the battlefield?
Exactly. He uses examples like Napoleon's victory against Blucher's army in 1814, where unexpected fog provided cover for a crucial French advance, or Frederick the Great's win at the Battle of Liegnitz in 1760, where a series of lucky breaks allowed his outnumbered forces to snatch victory. Clausewitz argues that chance plays a role in how effective a surprise attack will be, no matter how well you've planned.
That's a humbling thought, even for the most skilled military strategist. You can plan for everything, but sometimes you need a little luck on your side, too.
It's true, but Clausewitz doesn't just leave it at luck. He goes on to argue that to successfully use surprise, you have to already be dictating the terms of engagement.
Interesting. So you're saying it's not enough to just be sneaky.
Exactly. It's about more than just being quick or clever. It's about understanding the bigger picture and acting from a position of strength.
So if you're already in a strong position, a surprise attack can amplify your advantage.
Precisely. But if you try to use surprise from a position of weakness, you're more likely to get caught with your pants down, so to speak.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. It's like trying to bluff your way through a poker game when you have a weak hand. You're better off folding and waiting for a better opportunity.
Exactly. And this leads us perfectly into Chapter 10, where Clausewitz dives into stratagem. He compares it to wit, calling it a sleight of hand with actions.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of what he's getting at.
Oh.
It's about outsmarting your opponent, making them think you're doing one thing while you're actually doing another.
Precisely. But then he makes this really interesting observation. Despite how appealing stratagem might seem, it doesn't actually show up all that often in military history.
Really? That seems counterintuitive. You'd think military leaders would be all about clever tricks and deception.
You would, wouldn't you? But Clausewitz argues that it's because large-scale strategic deception is incredibly difficult to pull off. Think about it. Faking a troop movement, masking your intentions, those things require a massive amount of resources and coordination.
And if they backfire?
It can be disastrous. Not only do you lose the element of surprise, but you also reveal your true intentions to the enemy, giving them a huge advantage.
That's a great point. It's like trying to set up an elaborate prank. The more moving parts you have, the more likely it is that something will go wrong.
Exactly. And the risk versus reward just might not be there, especially if you're a leader with a strong strategic position already. It's like gambling when you're already holding a winning hand.
So if you're already in a good spot, it might not be worth the risk to try something too clever.
Precisely. Clausewitz uses this to make a point about the kind of leader who really excels at strategy, saying it's less about being a cunning trickster and more about having a correct and penetrating eye.
So it's about being able to see through the fog of war, cut through the noise, and make the best decision based on the information you have.
Exactly. Now, this doesn't mean that stratagem is completely useless. Clausewitz does suggest that in desperate situations, when your back is against the wall and you have very few options, stratagem can be a powerful tool.
So it becomes a last resort.
Exactly. A way to try to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It's like that Hail Mary pass in the final seconds of a football game.
Or a poker player going all in with a weak hand, hoping to bluff their opponent into folding.
Exactly. It's a high-risk, high-reward play. If you're already in a strong position, it's probably not worth the risk. But if you're facing certain defeat, a well-executed stratagem might be your only shot.
It's fascinating how these concepts, even though Clausewitz was writing nearly 200 years ago, still resonate so strongly with modern military thinking.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about how these concepts have played out in more modern conflicts. Would you say that the element of surprise is less common in modern warfare, given the advances in technology and intelligence gathering?
It certainly seems like it would be more difficult to achieve strategic surprise in today's world.
It's definitely more difficult. With satellite imagery, advanced radar systems, and sophisticated intelligence networks, it's incredibly hard to keep large-scale troop movements or major operations secret for very long.
You're right. Look at the first Gulf War, for example. The coalition forces spent weeks building up troops and equipment in the region. And while Saddam Hussein may have underestimated their capabilities, the element of surprise was largely absent.
Precisely. But that doesn't mean surprise is irrelevant in modern warfare. It's just shifted more towards the tactical level.
So while you might not be able to surprise an entire nation with a massive invasion force anymore, you can still achieve surprise on a smaller scale.
Exactly. Think about special forces operations, cyber attacks, or even the use of new and unexpected technologies. These can still achieve a degree of surprise and disruption.
That makes sense. It's about exploiting those small windows of opportunity before the enemy can react.
Exactly. And let's not forget about deception, which is still a vital part of warfare today. It might not always be on a grand scale, but misleading the enemy about your intentions, your capabilities, or even your location can give you a crucial advantage.
Right, like creating diversions, spreading disinformation, or using camouflage and concealment to mask your movements or intentions.
Exactly. It's about shaping the enemy's perception, making them believe something that isn't true, or even just making them hesitate long enough for you to seize the initiative.
So even in modern warfare, with all its technology and firepower, it still comes down to outsmarting your opponent.
Absolutely. Warfare at its core is a human endeavor. And as Clausewitz understood profoundly, it's a clash of wills, a contest of minds, where that human element, with all its complexities and unpredictability, plays a decisive role.
It's fascinating how these ideas from the 19th century still hold up so well in the 21st century. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Clausewitz, what are some key takeaways you think our listener, a member of the military, can glean from these chapters?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that surprise and stratagem aren't just about being sneaky or clever. They're about understanding the deeper currents of warfare, the interplay of force, will, and chance, and using them to your advantage.
It's about being adaptable, thinking critically, and always trying to stay one step ahead of your opponent.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that while technology and tactics are important, the true battleground is often the mind of your opponent. And that's a battleground where Clausewitz's insights remain incredibly relevant even today.
Absolutely. It's been eye-opening to explore these concepts with you. We hope this deep dive into Clausewitz has given you, our listener, some new perspectives on these essential elements of warfare.
And perhaps spark some new ideas about how you can apply them in your own military thinking.
Until next time. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.